Today, we're going to celebrate GBHI's 10th anniversary. And this will allow us to honor the remarkable legacy of Chuck Feeney, as we know, a visionary philanthropist whose belief in equity, values-based leadership, and the power of investing in people has made possible a decade of advancing brain health. And I would argue that we have shaped brain health over the last decade. And this is done through inspiring leaders to create a more equitable world. So I'm very honored to welcome Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who will ask him to come up in a few minutes. But before we do that, just to set the stage of brain health. So historically, well, brain health hasn't really been thought about until the last decade, but historically the goal was to try to eradicate neurological disease, psychiatric illness. But our concept of brain health has evolved since then. It's become a lot more nuanced. And today we think of brain health as the foundation of human flourishing, shaping how we think, learn, create, connect, empathize, and indeed love. Brain health underpins our ability to build relationships, to contribute to society, to adapt to change, and to realize our potential throughout the life course. And that is a right. It's a right for everyone, regardless of the brain health challenges that people may face. And as the global burden of brain and brain-related conditions is rising due to demographic aging and the age of polycrisis that we find ourselves in now, promoting and protecting brain health has become one of the defining scientific, social, and public health priorities of our time. And so the Chuck Feeney Lectures give us an opportunity to explore this broader vision and go beyond simply preventing illness, but also to think of brain health as the cornerstone of well-being, dignity, and thriving across the lifespan. And so with that, it is my pleasure to invite up Taoiseach Micheál Martin for the inaugural Chuck Feeney Lecture. And thank you very much for being here, and also because I understand that your vision and Chuck's vision are so closely aligned in terms of the value of education and research in promoting the wealth of our nation.
Boraír of Aghuinúsha Galéir, and I'm delighted to be here with you. Agus dóibh siúd atáling ón íosacht tá fáilte is fiche roimh chuig or bríomh chathair áling seo balla á chliam. Don chéad ceann de lechtaí Chuck Feeney in an enimid comóra demlína na Institute Downda Chráinte na Hin Chinne. Céad míle fáilte a Charda Galéir. That's in our own Gaelic language. I've just welcomed all those who may be from overseas or who may not understand the Gaelic language immediately. But to say it's a particular pleasure to be here this evening to contribute to an event which both honours a transformative philanthropist and engages us with some of the great challenges of our time. My thanks go to Prof. Linda Doyle for her kind invitation to speak, and to the leaders of the Global Brain Health Institute who have organised this evening's event. It is a particular honour to be here this evening and to welcome former President Mary Robinson. Her exceptional work on broadening the understanding of the existential risks from climate change and maintaining that sense of urgency about it continues to inspire us all, and we thank you for that leadership. It is a reminder to us all of the fundamental fact that rules-based and ambitious international cooperation is the only way that we can overcome the most important challenges facing our societies. I would also like to acknowledge the former head of Atlantic Philanthropies, Mr. Christopher Oxley, as well as the distinguished contributors to the panel discussion, as well as those in attendance who have lived experience of dementia and are making an important contribution to the development of new approaches to one of the most important societal and public health issues we face. Of course, I would like to particularly acknowledge Chuck's wife Helga and his granddaughter Juno, who I just met and who's been studying zoology here in Trinity for the last 4 years, and who's been running against my alma mater UCC as well, a very keen athlete, but who said to me that her heart is in Dublin and Dublin is her home because of her experiences here. Your presence, Helga and Juno, this evening, and others in the family, I think is a very important important way of reinforcing Chuck's legacy. Chuck Feeney, from my perspective, had no interest in a model of philanthropy which focused on the philanthropist. He accumulated a greater fortune than he ever anticipated. And in using that fortune, his priority was always to focus on the substance of making a difference to people's lives. I want to honour this by talking about both the importance of his approach to promoting understanding and progress, and within this, the specific priority of brain health in an ageing and changing society. As you all know, the first phase of Chuck's philanthropy in Ireland was exceptionally low-key, run out of a small office on Bagot Street with the generic title of Tara Consulting. The two most important rules for recipients of funding were, we approach you and you can't say where you got it. Donations were funneled through foundations and important new projects began to appear. Only weeks into my time as Minister for Education, and it was an exciting time back in 97 onwards, I received a request from Tara to ask if I would meet Chuck Feeney, which I was delighted to agree to. I hadn't known a whole lot about him at that stage, if I'm honest, and he was in the process of moving his giving to a more assertively strategic and system-level approach. He understood that even his level of funding could only have an impact if it changed wider policies and perspectives. I was told that he had noticed an investment package I had secured from the first memo I had brought to government. This included a provision for the first ever research programme to be funded by the Department of Education. When we met, it was for me an absolutely fascinating and consequential conversation. He was there to ask questions, with the most important being, what are you trying to build and what does that system look like? We shared a core belief that to achieve and maintain a high standard of living in a society, investment in advanced research was not an option, it was essential. I had already indicated that I intended to establish the core principles to underpin such investment: independent awards, externally evaluated to an international standard and at levels ranging from individual scholarships up to major research programs and facilities. I also detailed the types of funding institutions which we intended to develop and the role to be played by universities developing in-depth expertise and being open to genuinely world-class standards. Our discussion was about education, research and their role in Ireland's future. We didn't talk about specific universities or specific facilities at that stage. And after the meeting, I offered him a lift. He's a very humble man. But as I walked into Leinster House, he wanted to lift to Kildare Street. A curious deputy, and deputies can be curious, asked me, who was that who got out of your car? To which I replied truthfully at the time, no one you would know. And but in essence, that's how what became known as the PRTLI programme, first major investment programme in third level research, emerged and emerged at the scale that it did, because in the end, Chuck offered up to about 120 million, which we matched. These key objectives that we would match it. Charlie McCreevy was particularly responsive as Minister for Finance, which was interesting. Charlie McCreevy had a particular fondness for education. Not so much for health, but that's another story in terms of spending and so on in health. But education, and I think it might have been a background issue, I was fortunate that he had a positive disposition to education. But the important thing about PRTLI was there was a time when, you know, if the minister knew a university or knew an academic, maybe the person had an inside track in terms of getting the grant and so on. PRTLI changed that. We forced universities to say, okay, become strategic, do your SWOT analysis, get your objectives, and be subject to international peer review. That's the magic of his legacy in respect of PRTLI. It's not just the mere giving of the funding. It was the system change, the enabling people to become more competitive, more strategic, and also understand themselves what our core strengths are in given institutions, which is also important. We can't always be all things to everybody or to everything. And today, moving on, the name of Chuck Feeney is widely known and honoured for a programme of philanthropic giving, which continues to have that profound and positive impact, changing the way things are done as well as funding that. To him, wealth was not a signal of unique virtue, but an urgent responsibility. He did indeed seek to change the world, but to do so by a deep and sincere belief in humanity. When he became by far the largest ever supporter of advocacy groups in Ireland, I was always impressed by the fact that Atlantic did not seek to use its own institutional power to impose an agenda. It respected the mandate of government and told the groups which it supported that they must develop their own legitimacy and influence. This was one of the many areas where Chuck's philanthropy was radically different from those who went before. With few exceptions, a core principle was that if the recipients' ideas were good enough, then there would come a point where they would be self-sustaining or would be so successful that the problem they were targeting was overcome. A pathway to sustainability was required for all, be it in major research facilities or community activities. And within this was an understanding that no positive purpose is served if you refuse to acknowledge that a line of inquiry or new activity didn't work out. Chuck understood fully the core scientific idea that the worst research refuses to be open to failure. If every starting hypothesis was right, we would need a lot less research. Chuck's philanthropy was also distinguished by the scale and ambition of his commitment to giving while living. Historically, philanthropy of this level was defined by creating monuments and dominated by permanent endowments. Endowments are important, but the idea that we should focus on the urgency of today and the near future was radical when it became Atlantic's driving ideal. It would be almost impossible to mention all of the areas where Chuck's funding has left a lasting influence, but I would like to mention a few. Chuck's sustained support for peace and reconciliation on this island will always be remembered. In my own city of Cork, his legacy is still keenly felt. UCC's work is underpinned by leading-edge technology and library facilities which he supported. But more critically, his support for Marymount Hospice and for palliative care was groundbreaking at that time and crucial to so many families who have benefited from that. And very interesting story behind that. I had moved on to become Minister for Health. Atlantic obviously liked the way I did things in education, so they approached me again. And they brought over a geriatrician from Johns Hopkins. And they asked him, they said, we want to do something in the area of elderly care in Ireland. So he did a bit of a tour of Ireland. He came back to me about 9 months later and he said, hospice is where you people do something unique. And we had very rudimentary sort of facilities. But what struck this gentleman was the ethos of care in hospice. And at that time, Tony O'Brien was chair of the Palliative Care Council, which was an emerging concept and was developing a national palliative care strategy. And they were developing a new facility in Marymount, but they were going to do it in the old building. But Atlantic, I think, assisted with, first of all, an architect and sort of saying, let's rethink how you're going to do this. And so they did, and they said you should move out of the idea of trying to readapt or restructure the existing historic facility and go to a new greenfield site, and we'll design a 21st century hospice fit for purpose for the needs of families and those who will use the hospice. And the result is the Marymount Hospice facility we have today, which was particularly groundbreaking and something, again, that inspired me on that occasion. So it's kind of an insight as to how Atlantic worked for, again, not just money for a building, but let's change the way we do things for the better. Atlantic's Children and Youth Programme was also a significant catalyst for change and encouraging a new focus on evidence-based prevention and early intervention programs. And of course, Atlantic was, and through the Global Health Brain Institute, remains a leader in promoting greater understanding and coordinated action on brain health and dementia. There are few, if any, more important public health issues. Brain health impacts on every person. It shapes our ability to think, learn, work, connect, and contribute. It underpins every aspect of our individual and societal functioning and is fundamental to our potential and to our well-being. Brain health is not just a medical issue. It is a dynamic, lifelong process. And this is why the scale and complexity of brain health requires an approach that brings together different disciplines, sectors and perspectives, like the people here this evening, to improve outcomes for the people of Ireland and beyond. Over the last decade, you have committed to developing a global community of leaders who work across boundaries, connecting science, policy and lived experience to drive meaningful change. The Atlantic Fellows Programme is at the heart of this approach, providing training, mentorship and support to emerging leaders in brain health. In Ireland, we have made significant advances over the past number of years in assisting those with dementia and in brain health. And there's been a very important synergy, again, between Atlantic's work and the government's. As our population ages, the number of people living with dementia is growing and is predicted to increase from 64,000 in 2020 to about 150,000 in 2045. Following the publication of the National Dementia Strategy, Atlantic co-funded, together with the government, an implementation programme. And in 2020, I appointed a Minister of State to lead on this area, Mary Butler, who had done a lot of work with the Alzheimer's Society and particularly on dementia. And last year, the importance of that again was further reinforced by the fact that that Minister of State now attends all cabinet meetings. The implementation programme funded activities across several key domains, improving GP diagnosis and management of dementia, piloting intensive home care supports, driving public awareness, strengthening research capacity, and establishing the National Dementia Office, now called National Dementia Services. And a dementia model of care was published in 2023 to ensure equitable access to dementia assessment, diagnosis, post-diagnostic support, and care planning for people across the country. We've also made efforts to make Irish society more dementia inclusive with a public awareness campaign, Dementia Understand Together, to combat stigma and improve awareness and understanding of dementia. Understand Together has evolved from that initial campaign into a community movement, including across public transport, which is building communities that support people with dementia to continue to participate in society for as long as they are able. The campaign is supported by more than 2,100 champions, with a coalition of over 60 organisations working with people living with dementia and their families. In parallel with its focus on strengthening public policy, inclusion and services for people with dementia, the Atlantic Philanthropies funded the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland in initiatives to ensure that people with dementia and family carers are active participants in shaping dementia policy and services. The Irish Working Group of People with Dementia and the Dementia Carers Campaign Network also benefited from Atlantic seed funding and have gone from strength to strength in their advocacy and awareness efforts. One of our priorities is to improve data on dementia through the establishment of an Irish Dementia Registry. This registry will work to improve dementia care quality, inform service planning and policy development, and support research for people living with dementia in Ireland. There are many other concrete steps underway or planned for dementia care, but I believe we also have to engage with a wider agenda. An agenda which more actively empowers people seeking to maintain good brain health and to prevent or delay the onset or progression of dementia. International research published by the Lancet Commission has shown that 14 risk factors account for up to 45% of all dementias. If we can address these risk factors on an individual, health service and societal level, we can positively impact on the prevalence of dementia in the future. However, we also have to acknowledge that many of the factors involve measures which are and will remain in the realm of personal decisions. If you think about it, many of the major public health challenges we have faced over the last half century, and which have had a hugely positive impact, involve very specific actions or controls. A changing combination of public education, reinforced by high-profile schemes or restrictions, were used, for example, to promote vaccines or to reduce smoking. In this case, the key to greater brain health is to be found in many factors. But we perhaps should get used to the idea of looking at brain health just as we look at cardiovascular health or indeed other areas of health. And Those many factors, some are directly linked to core social goals, others are strongly linked to personal behaviour. Perhaps the most important objective is to empower people with an understanding of where they may have personal agency. The Health Service Executive has recently published an excellent brain health guide. Internationally, the Department of Health and National Dementia Services are also taking part in a dementia and stroke prevention work package as part of the current European Union Joint Action on Dementia. Our objective should be the ambitious one that each person understands the links between different factors and brain health to the same level as they understand the link between smoking, cancer and heart disease. It is not about telling people how they must behave, but showing the clear harmful impacts of certain factors and the benefits of others. I've absolutely no doubt that as research continues and new areas are studied, this will continue to be a rapidly changing area which will require constant engagement. To give one example, the profound impact on the individual and society of online connectivity and behaviours is obviously central to long-term brain health. Our decision last year to ban smartphones during school hours is important to protecting school children and communities, but I also believe it will be seen as an important move in personal health. One of my favourite anecdotes about that measure is that teachers told me that for the first time in a long time, they began to hear children shouting and making noise in corridors again, which is kind of an extraordinary thought to me, because that's what I thought students always did. But it just shows the impact of social media in terms of changing behavioural patterns and so forth. People with lived experience and their families, clinicians, academics, voluntary organisations, statutory services and government all have distinct but interconnected roles. By working together and collaboratively, we can ensure that people living with dementia receive a timely diagnosis, are supported more effectively, and are enabled to live as well and as independently as possible in their own homes and communities. I believe we've come some way towards realising the vision of an Ireland where dementia is destigmatised and people are supported to live with dignity in their own communities. Looking out and seeing the diverse range of people in attendance tonight gives me great confidence in what we can achieve together. Agus deireadh go mbeidh buíoch sa rís le Atlantic Philanthropies a rís eile as an éireacht a thug sibh do bhaintear na hÉirden. Guím gach rath an uile dhuine anseo a gláiste na tríóide, san obair a dhéanamh sibh sna blianta amach roing. And finally, again, I want to thank Atlantic Philanthropies for the legacy you have provided to the people of Ireland and for the catalyst that Atlantic has represented in so many aspects of Irish life. It is an extraordinary legacy that Chuck Feeney has left. And to all here in Trinity College, I wish you every success in the years ahead. Go míle míle maith agaibh go léir.
Thank you very much for those wonderful remarks, and it's an absolute testament to the legacy of Chuck Feeney that you're here to share that with us. So, very much obliged. We're now delighted to welcome Dr. Linda Doyle, our Provost and President of Trinity College Dublin, to offer a welcome address. And I just recently found out that, of course, ex-Professor Dr. Linda Doyle, that you gave up your professorship and took the title of doctor when you became provost as a symbol of service to our community. And service is absolutely the core of what you're doing, and you've been a fantastic support for GBHI. So thank you very much and welcome.
I will say, Iracema, it's a rule in Trinity, as distinct from I was particularly generous just to get started. But Taoiseach, we're absolutely delighted to have you here, Your Excellencies, members of Chuck Feeney's family. I believe, apart from Juno and Helga, there's 10 members in total here. Really delighted so many people could make it. Yeah. And obviously, Juno, you have fantastic taste in universities. I would like that noted. Also, Chris Oxley, I'm delighted you're here, and others from Atlantic Philanthropies. And we don't say former president, we say former chancellor, Mary Robinson. Fantastic, Mary, for you to be here. Really, really delighted. Of course, our wonderful Global Brain Health Institute colleagues. There are many of them scattered around here. Members past and present from Ireland and beyond. It's really fantastic to have you here this evening. And so many friends and admirers of the late, great Chuck Feeney. I'm delighted to welcome you all to Trinity. Taoiseach, thank you so much for your address. I think you expressed so beautifully the impact that Chuck had on universities and on Ireland. And we're really, really grateful for your time here. For people who don't know, Ireland is about to take over the presidency of the EU Council, and it's only 3 weeks away. So it's especially generous with your time. There's probably a lot on your plate at the moment. And just to say, we'll be running our own programme of activities here in Trinity across the 6 months of the presidency. And I hope we'll be able to help demonstrate to Europe and the world the very, very best of Irish education, of higher education, the scholarship, the research and the innovation for which Ireland is well known and which Chuck Feeney played a part in. So there's just 2 points I would like to make about the theme of our gathering this evening. So the theme, for people, whether you know, is brain health, equity and our shared planet. So for me, the first is that Chuck Feeney could clearly see the value of research and in turn the value of evidence-informed policy making. He supported research, as the Taoiseach spoke about so eloquently. He supported researchers. And he could see that research is not an end in itself, but can feed into policy that affects the everyday life of all people. That appreciation of research is not something we can take for granted. It's under a massive threat in lots of places around the world. So especially in a world of populism and polarisation, higher education is being devalued. And I know that that is a feeling that's shared by many of others in universities around the world. And I know that this is something that would worry Chuck if he were here and should worry us all greatly. We can't be complacent. We all need to be making the case for actively supporting research and funding research. And actually, Taoiseach, when you were talking about PRTLI, it brought to mind, we have a new funding initiative here in Ireland called Inspire. It's focused on research infrastructure. That is actually a PRTLI too, I believe. I know you had a huge hand in that. And that to me also speaks to the fact that Chuck got involved at the beginning of PRTLI 1, and now here we are again decades later with that funding being created. But of course, I couldn't let the moment pass by saying, keep on funding research. It's important. And I know if Chuck were here, he would be saying that too. And if anyone asks why fund research, I think you only have to look at the Atlantic Philanthropies funded Global Brain Health Institute in its fabulous 10th year. Happy birthday, 10 years. And it's taken a significant societal challenge, the challenge that the Taoiseach spoke about, brain health, and applied rigorous academic research to advance our understanding of the field. And that in turn has changed into evidence-based policy proposals leading to the advance of equity in the context of improving brain health for people right across the world. It's a role model for the practical human benefits of funding research. So I think that is really, really important, and hugely thanks to the work that Chuck has done. The second aspect of Chuck's legacy reflected in this evening's theme is the idea of a shared planet. And I know, Mary, you will be talking about this. Chuck Feeney's philanthropy reached across oceans and borders. This afternoon, I was sitting in my office and I could hear actually chants of protest outside the window. I'm not sure if people noticed, but there was a protest in Dublin. I think it spurred on by what was happening in Belfast. And actually what I heard in my office as I sat there was the phrase, "Get them out, get them out." I heard that repeatedly. And actually it just really sent some kind of chills through you. In one sense, it's really hard to be standing here exploring the theme of a shared planet in such a positive way, in such positive terms, while this is happening or was happening a few metres away. And I was thinking about this. And GBHI is the global Brain Health Institute. It's built on international relationships and cooperation at a global level. It celebrates diversity by bringing different cultural perspectives to bear, working with people from many different countries, drawing on skills from so many different areas and disciplines. And this is central to how GBHI works, this outward-looking perspective. As we can see, there's a real retrenchment going on, a retreat into what Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, has called a world of fortresses. And I was really thinking about this today. And, it really struck me, the kind of open, collaborative, multicultural initiatives like GBHI, supported by Chuck Feeney and supported by Atlantic Philanthropies, could not exist in a world of fortresses. And we should resist any temptation to put up walls when there is a much, much greater rewarding path ahead in tackling our shared problems together across the globe. So when I look at GBHI, when I look at the legacy of Chuck Feeney, what it says to me is that it represents those values that the world is so much in need of today. So this evening is very much about celebrating Chuck Feeney's legacy, visible so clearly to the Global Brain Health Institute, a legacy that tackles issues of our time, is based on scientific rigour and evidence, one that embraces many different perspectives and is founded on openness. And I am so, so grateful for what Chuck has done for Trinity, what Chuck has done for Ireland, and what Chuck has done for the world. Gurv míle maith agat.
Many thanks, Provost. We're now privileged to invite to the stage Mr. Chris Exley, whose leadership and partnership with Chuck Feeney has really been part of this whole vision. And of course, not only GBHI, but the Atlantic Institute, and as well as the Atlantic Philanthropies. So you'll be reflecting on Chuck's legacy for us tonight. So welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Iracema, and thank you, Taoiseach, for the very insightful and echoing some sentiments and experience that still mean a lot to us in the context of what is happening in Ireland today and can be happening in Ireland for the future. Thank you, President Doyle, former President, former Chancellor. I could extend that list, but Mary Robinson, thank you very much. We were just talking about how 10 years ago, where you were present at the inauguration of GBHI, and it's hard to believe that it's been 10 years. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be here to celebrate. Happy birthday to the leadership team. I see people here who have been instrumental in starting the program. I see a director from the Atlantic Philanthropies who quizzed you to no end to make sure that what you were going to do was going to be successful. So it takes a village, we know, and there are many people here who deserve thanks for your efforts and investments in this program. I was fortunate to work with Chuck Feeney over 35 years, both in his business and philanthropic endeavors through the Atlantic Philanthropies. And as I continue to reflect on that experience, I keep mining and finding nuggets of insight, inspiration, and motivation. And his legacy very much continues in that respect. I wanted to share two themes today, two things that I reflected on, observed, and were meaningful to me about who Chuck was and what he did both in his business and philanthropic endeavors. And there are two words, knowledge and risk. And by they may seem simple terms, not unlike Chuck's own style of expressing himself, a style I have enjoyed calling New Jersey Zen. It's simple language, but with real meaning. And for those who've worked with Chuck, you know he's not a man of many words, and you hear a sentence and you're waiting for the paragraph, and you may have missed the depth and meaning of the sentence. So let me expand on the terms knowledge. I don't just mean accumulation of facts. I mean knowledge to include observation, awareness, understanding, recognition, curiosity, and empathy, the ability to know and understand how others think and feel. Knowledge might be what philosopher Jennifer Frey has described as that which cultivates the higher capacities in a person. By risk, I don't mean gambling on an outcome. I mean having the insight, awareness, moral clarity, and courage to invest in an idea, an institution, or a person and trust in the soundness of the idea and the capabilities and commitment of that person or institution. There is no certainty in that approach, hence the risk. But it is a risk rooted in knowledge, in observation, awareness, and understanding. It is an informed and purposeful risk rooted in trust in the idea and in others. It is a commitment to apply these attributes of knowledge to achieve a desired outcome without guarantees, but with every reasonable effort to achieve success. Many of you know Chuck Feeney's story from Conor O'Cleary's biography, The Billionaire Who Wasn't, and which has recently been reissued and includes a chapter on the Atlantic Fellows Initiatives. So I encourage you to read more if you have not already done that. You'll know some of the history of Chuck's philanthropy, including his decision to spend, and I prefer the term investment, all of his and his family's fortune in his lifetime for philanthropic purposes. When Chuck and the foundation board agreed in 2002 to implement that plan to spend the endowment in his lifetime, they adopted 4 programs to frame the final grant making, and Taoiseach, you've alluded to several of those: disadvantaged children and youth, human rights and reconciliation, population health, and aging, which is the roots for the GBHI program. In so doing, the directors also framed a comparably modest budget called Founding Chairman's Grants, recognizing that Chuck, in his entrepreneurial spirit, would not be bound by any particular narrow definition. But I do think there was a failure to recognize that Chuck did have a strategy in his initiatives, which we've been discussing today, which is really advancing knowledge. Most of the grants that Chuck personally initiated were associated with higher education and research institution, often in the form of support for buildings that housed the people dedicated to and engaged in the creation and dissemination of knowledge. The top 10 Atlantic Foundation grantees are all universities, with Trinity ranking 4th, behind the University of Limerick. I'll get back to that in a bit. Chuck was very close to Frank Rhodes, Cornell University president, where Chuck attended university. And Frank Rhodes also served for a period of time as chair of the board of directors of the foundation. Frank Rhodes' articulation of the role of university in his book, The Creation of the Future, probably most closely sums up Chuck's theory of change. Now, this is not New Jersey Zen. This is Frank Rhodes talking about the theory of change that I think really reflects Chuck's perspective. Frank wrote, "The university promotes neither political action nor government policy, but it provides the knowledge and data on which both are developed. It manufactures no products, but it creates the science and technology on which those products depend. It produces no mass circulation newspapers, magazines, or television programs, but it trains their publishers, writers, and producers. It informs public understanding, cultivates public taste, and contributes to a nation's well-being as it nurtures and trains each new generation of architects, artists, authors, business leaders, engineers, farmers, lawyers, physicians, poets, scientists, social workers, and teachers, as well as a steady succession of advocates, dreamers, doers, dropouts, parents, politicians, preachers, prophets, social reformers, visionaries, and volunteers who leaven, nudge, and shape the course of public life. Knowledge is the foundation of action, but it is not the action, and knowledge is not partisan. Yet if the foundation for any action is flawed, if knowledge, broadly defined, is flawed, biased, or incomplete, actions and results that flow from that foundational knowledge will also be flawed. Chuck observed and believed that investments in knowledge would most effectively address root causes, whether in health sciences, human behavior, or social and political choices. Chuck believed that the most lasting contribution to enhancing knowledge was to contribute to capital projects that literally would lay the tangible foundations for change, that would house the drivers and dissemination of knowledge, the people who are the creators and custodians of that undertaking. As Chuck has said in the Giving Pledge, which is the Warren Buffett, Bill Gates initiative to encourage wealthy people to give more money sooner, great buildings for great minds can make a big difference in the lives of a lot of people. Chuck was an entrepreneur in business and philanthropy. He took risks rooted in knowledge and observation, awareness, and understanding, informed and purposeful. He trusted in the ideas and people to make a difference. He looked for unrecognized opportunities and undervalued assets where there were those business opportunities that yielded commercial returns or in people and institutions that generated a different kind of return, an improvement in the human condition. His famous interest in supporting the underdog was not an expression of providing alms for the needy. It was a strategic investment in generating returns where others did not see the untapped value of those returns. He bet on people, on institutions, and on countries where others failed to see the returns he saw. He bet on expanding research at Irish universities, PRTLI, the Irish peace process. He bet on Vietnam health and higher education systems following the wars. He bet on Australia's knowledge economy. He bet on South Africa's health science research and responses to HIV/AIDS. And while recognizing the value and strengths of established institutions like Trinity College Dublin, he also bet on undervalued opportunities at the University of Limerick, Chaminade in Hawaii, Da Nang University in Vietnam, Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, among others. Chuck took informed risks, rooted in knowledge of the place and people. His own pursuit of knowledge was enhanced by his keen observations, voracious reading, and by his anonymity, which allowed him to be proximate to the people and institutions he sought to invest in without the artifice that can accompany those processes. Ultimately, Chuck's knowledge of place, institutions, and its people was complemented by trust. Trust in his knowledge that he understood the context and the people that were candidates for support, and trust that they would apply themselves to the shared mission of the endeavor. To extend trust is to take a risk. Understanding a context, a culture, institutions, and their people to whom you're entrusting resources supports taking that risk. Or as Chuck said in his inimitable New Jersey Zen style, there's nothing wrong with a big bet if a big bet is a good bet. One of the most powerful examples from Chuck that has stayed with me is that even when that trust was violated, Chuck did not lose the capacity to regenerate trust with other compelling, deserving people and institutions. So broad and deep knowledge and risk rooted in that knowledge and trust are indispensable to the Feeney way. For Chuck, advancing knowledge was the ultimate big bet. A postscript. In 2012, Chuck stepped back from active participation in the foundation's grant making. And it was left to the board and our advisors and our staff to imagine how we could maximize our final grants that honored Chuck's values and his approach to philanthropy. We concluded by making big bets on people, on creating 7 International Atlantic Fellows programs, of which GBHI is one, supported by an Atlantic Institute that would sustain engagement and enhance the influence and impact of the Fellows community to advance healthier, fairer, more inclusive societies. It was an informed risk, a big bet, rooted in Chuck's exhortation to use your wealth to help people. Use your wealth to create institutions to help people. In the end, it's always about people. Most of the Atlantic Fellows programs and the Atlantic Institute are housed in universities or work in close partnership with universities or include academic leaders in their leadership teams. The Institute Charter reflects this approach to the pursuit of knowledge. The Atlantic Fellows programs bring together passionate, experienced individuals from different backgrounds, again, the diversity, areas of expertise areas of expertise and professions to learn from one another and collaborate to advance solutions to pressing problems. The charters of the various programs share a common introduction that the programs shall not present or advocate for a specific framework or single ideology. Each cohort will include fellows with diverse perspectives. Individual fellows will need to commit to bridge rather than to other, have the social and emotional maturity to engage in uncomfortable discussions, and have the compassion and courage to understand, be open to, and be changed by others' perspectives and experiences. Prospective Atlantic Fellows are selected based on their social and emotional maturity. They are open to, can engage with, and hold diversity and complexity. And President Doyle, this is the kind of theme that we think is central to this undertaking, especially in today's world. They have an ability and a desire to learn from people with different views and experiences on a local and global scale, and have a commitment to collaboration where they commit to working with and supporting others to achieve individual and collective impact. The Institute and the Fellows community mirrors the role of a university and echoes Frank Rhodes's characterization of a knowledge-searching community. Frank writes, "Without community, knowledge becomes idiosyncratic. The lone learner studying in isolation is vulnerable to narrowness, dogmatism, and untested assumption, and learning misses out on being expansive and informed, contested by alternative viewpoints. Without the community, personal discovery is limited, not because the individual inquirer is any less creative or original than the group, but because their conclusions remain unchallenged and untested. Private knowledge is knowledge lost." It is not only the testing of conclusions that requires community, increasingly identifying issues of importance, specifying the problem to be addressed, framing the experiment, designing the study, and developing the competence and skill to pursue it also requires the teamwork and joint effort of a community. And effective service, the humane application of knowledge, cannot be pursued in isolation. Its very nature involves the recognition of need in others and the deliberate application of knowledge and dedication of skills to meet the need. The interacting community multiplies the power and extends the reach of its members. In addition to the buildings on this campus, the Atlantic Fellows community here at Trinity College Dublin and across the globe are a manifestation of Chuck's legacy and his exhortation by example to seek knowledge in its broadest sense, to be curious and observe, to increase our awareness, understanding, recognition, and empathy, and to take risks informed by that knowledge, to make good, big bets on people to help people. That is Chuck's simple but profound New Jersey Zen message, and it continues to be our opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for those wonderful words. Before we call up our next speaker, I'm just going to briefly remind everybody of what the aims are of GBHI and why we are in existence. And it's simple: to address the threats to brain health globally, and to do that from whichever discipline you work in, or whichever country you live in, or whichever community you serve. And those threats, as we've all been hearing, as we'll be reflecting on in a few minutes, are at the national and global level in the form of inequality, demographic shifts, migration and conflict, technological disruption, and of course, climate change. But they're at the level of our communities as well. Social exclusion, poverty, unsafe environments, we've been hearing about that today, low education, and land and food inequity. And also the level of the individual, through trauma, lifestyle risks, mental health challenges, and rights abuses. And all of these threats ultimately impact on the brain. And the brain is a mediator of these threats and shapes the way we respond through our behaviors, but it is also a target organ. And as a result of these threats, we see accelerated aging, neurodegenerative disorders, mental health issues, and of course, something, Brian, that you've been thinking about a lot, diseases of despair. So with that in mind, I'm going to invite our next speaker up, former President Mary Robinson, who's of course thought very deeply about these threats, and you'll be talking about climate, health, and equity. Please.
Well, I'm very happy to be here 10 years on from the memorable launch here in this hall of the Global Brain Health Initiative. I'm delighted that Helga and 9 other members of the family are here today. And I'm really honoured that the Taoiseach is still here. I thought you'd be long gone by now. When I reflect on the remarkable life of Chuck Feeney, a well-known Irish phrase comes to mind. Is there scacha héile a Warren Nadini? It's in each other's shelter that we flourish. Simply put, people need one another, and we owe each other a debt of care. Chuck understood this from an early age. He grew up in a close-knit community in New Jersey during the Great Depression, where he saw firsthand the importance of people looking after one another and of giving quietly without expectation of recognition. Years later, in 1948, the international community gave expression to these values through one of the least discussed provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When people think of human rights, they tend to think of individual rights, which of course are extremely important. The rights we can claim for ourselves and claim for others. Yet, one of the most important articles of the Declaration is not about what we can claim for ourselves or for others, it's about our duty to the other. Article 29 states, and I quote, "Everyone has duties to the community, in which alone the free and full expression of their personality is possible." The only way a person can become truly themselves is through their relationship with others and by fulfilling their duties to their community. I think we all recognize that when we act for others, we receive far more than when we just look after ourselves. I see heads nodding. We know. People say very often, I get far more back than I give. And that's because you've reached a different expression of your own personality. As Chuck put it, I'm happy when what I'm doing is helping others. I do agree about the rather terse phrases that you described so well, Chris. I begin with Article 29 because community is an antidote to many of the challenges we face in a world where untruths, mistrust, fragmentation, and polarization have become so common. The dehumanizing of the other, what you heard promised, the call out, get them out. This is the world we live in. But it's also critical to addressing the climate and nature crisis. Chuck understood these duties to the community, and he lived that understanding on a scale few could imagine. And Christopher has given us a wonderful sense of that. Part of what made Chris's giving unique was his willingness to support new ideas that had not been tried before. As Chris emphasized, and I'm glad you emphasized that, Atlantic Philanthropies was prepared to take risks. I can testify to that from my personal experience. When I'd completed my 5 years as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, I was left with a strong sense of frustration. A frustration because there was a persistent divide in both how human rights were understood and advanced. Western countries tended to focus on promoting civil and political rights. And there were many great organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, etc., that were championing and holding governments to account and pointing fingers and accusing. It was a well-known path. Developing countries wanted to put more emphasis on economic and social rights, like the rights to food, health, and education. I did get some interesting offers of university appointments in the United States at the end of my 5 years, but I really wanted to go a different path. And fortunately, I met with John Healy, the then CEO of Atlantic Philanthropies, and I explained that I wanted to explore, in a way I wanted to just pioneer how to advance economic and social rights in practice in African countries. And John listened, and he said that, you know, it was definitely a new approach, but that was precisely what philanthropy was for. And this enabled me, with Atlantic support, to form a small NGO called Realising Rights. It was a kind of pun on words, that everyone in the world should realise they had human rights, and that those with power should realise those rights, meaning implement those rights. And I persuaded the Aspen Institute to partner with me in pioneering this work, particularly in Liberia and Ghana. It involved, for example, working with health ministers and getting them to know they had to develop a better relationship with the finance minister in their cabinet, because if they didn't, they wouldn't get enough resources, and that they must speak about health to the finance minister as being something very worth investing in. And it was a kind of whole new language, whole new way of doing, and I was very engaged in it, and I was glad that subsequently there were great centres for economic and social rights that filled a kind of gap in how we were approaching human rights. That experience of being in African countries, because I was also honorary president of Oxfam at the time, and they would wheel me out to different African countries, that experience brought home the injustices that were driven by the climate and nature crisis. It was quite a shock to me. As President of Ireland, I hadn't made any speech about climate. It wasn't something that we knew about. When I became High Commissioner, I did know about it, but another part of the UN was dealing with it. And I was in a big silo of human rights, gender equality, rights of indigenous peoples, rights of people with disabilities. Didn't make the connection with climate and nature. I often like to just say that because I feel it very strongly. I was late coming to the issue. But being in African countries in 2003, 2004, 2005, I was shocked at the sort of scale of the impacts. The rainy seasons weren't coming. There was long periods of drought, flash flooding that destroyed the village. Everywhere you went, the problem was. And then in 2009, I remember attending an Oxfam climate hearing with Archbishop Tutu, actually, where a fourth-generation farmer from Uganda, Constance O'Kellett, explained that farming had become a kind of gamble, so much of a risk now, because the seasons could no longer be relied on. And I remember, from my time growing up in Mayo and going out on long calls with my father, that farmers always complained about the weather, always complained about the weather. So I kind of put this to Constance, and she stood up and she said, "This is different. This is outside our experience." And I learned afterwards that Constance always stood up when she had something important to say. And, when you think about it in an African village, what is it to say outside our experience? It's probably an experience that goes back 200 years. Because the grandmother would have listened to the grandchild would have listened to her grandmother, and so on. So what struck me was the injustices that I perceived, and of course that have continued and worsened. That the climate impacts hit the poorest countries, the poorest communities, small island states, indigenous peoples, much earlier and much more severely. And they are not responsible. And there's a gender dimension within that, because women are not at the table. They probably don't have land rights. They don't get training, etc. They don't get credit. And yet they are the ones making their communities resilient. And I was just struck by Constance, a woman whose community was bearing the serious consequences of climate shocks that they were not responsible for, and that she and other women were actually building the resilience. And we see that now all over the world. The smallholder woman farmer that we're celebrating this year, this is the year of the woman farmer, and Ireland and Jordan are the sponsors of it. They are not small. I see I have fans in the audience here. But climate justice requires leadership. That's something I feel very strongly about. And seeing the way Constance had organised local women to build resilience in her community in East Uganda, and seeing so many similar examples globally, led me more recently to be a co-founder of Project Dandelion, the symbol of the dandelion, a weed and a flower. It's a climate-led, women-led climate justice movement. And what it does is it provides a way of linking women leaders at the top, those of us who have access to the decision-making tables in one way or another, and women and communities at local level working for climate justice. Project Dandelion is women-led, but by no means women only. We have a growing cohort, I'm glad to say, of supportive men. Climate justice requires us to recognise our responsibilities to one another across communities, countries, and generations. In that sense, it's also about putting Article 29 into practice. This idea that we owe something to one another and to our communities is not only a principle of international human rights law, it's actually something I came across very vividly when I was out and around the country in early 1990 looking for votes. It was a very different Ireland then. It was an Ireland that was just benefiting in rural Ireland from the Common Agricultural Policy. There was some money in rural Ireland, and towns and even villages wanted the facilities that the cities had. Facilities like sports for children, facilities for the elderly, for people with disabilities. And they were combining together. This was something that I really became very aware of. They were improving local life through mutual aid and cooperation to secure new facilities for their towns, for sports teams, for those in need, for children and for the elderly, etc. And at the time, they were using the word mehel clubs, and the spirit of mehel. And I talked this up, and I think that might have been one of the reasons why I ultimately managed to turn things around and get elected. While mehel had its origins in agricultural labour, it came to represent a recognition that our well-being is bound up in the well-being of others. And this tradition of mehel, of community and shared solidarity is one we can draw on again today, because I believe that there is a moment that demands a global mehel, grounded in human rights and in the spirit of Article 29. And the idea of mehel is not unique to Ireland. In Southern Africa, it's known as Ubuntu. I am because we are. At COP30 last year in Belém, the Brazilian presidency used the language of a global mutirão, a collective effort in pursuit of a common goal. And actually, the sense of community is really very strong in countries all around the world. And interestingly, it's very strong, particularly in communities of colour in the United States. It's a very, very strong sense. And yet we've never really made it a mainstream human rights issue, which I'm now, as I say, determined to try to do with many others. The great challenges we now face, the climate and nature crisis, conflict and inequality, can't be solved individually. We must move instead towards a world in which communities shape how we live, govern and care for one another. As I'm sure you know, Chuck almost always shunned awards and public recognition. There were, however, a few exceptions. There was a wonderful exception when we gave the 9 honorary degrees when I was Chancellor. It happened here in Trinity. The 9 universities in Ireland honoured Chuck. But there was also another suggestion by Professor Brian McGrath of Dublin City University. He proposed naming the main pathway through that campus the Feeney Way. Chuck accepted on one condition, that he, in quotes, would not be blamed for the litter. I hope that in our own way, we can adopt a version of the Feeney Way into our own lives. recognizing the responsibilities we owe to our communities and giving what we can in our own lifetimes, whether through our time, our resources, our care, or our actions. And perhaps that's how we should understand giving while living, as a commitment that we can all make. And I'll finish with Chuck's own words. There's no shortage of people who need help. It's a market that will always, always exist. Iracema mahagad go there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those wonderful words. So we're now going to invite our panel to come up, please. Anywhere? Rupa, you sit there, please. Kim over here. Ian over here. Whoops. Okay. So welcome, everyone. I'll just give you a brief introduction, first of all. So few voices have done more to challenge conventional thinking about health than Rupa Maria, physician, activist, scholar, and author of Deep Medicine, which I encourage you all to read, also known as the Doctor of Dirt, I believe. And you've been a passionate advocate for understanding how human health is deeply connected to the health of soil, food systems, communities, and environments. And then we have Kim, one of our current fellows. We're very proud that you're here. Thank you very much. And you bring a human rights perspective to our conversation. You're an attorney at law in Barbados and, of course, a current Atlantic Fellow for Equity and Brain Health. And finally, Ian, thank you very much. To ensure that we keep the brain at the center of our discussions, Professor Ian Robertson, of course, one of the founding directors of GBHI, one of the visionaries behind the movement. So I'm going to address some remarks to each of you and strict instructions that you have to keep to 3 minutes. And our timekeeper is, where are you? There she is. Note. So, Rupa, I'm going to start with you. Thinking about the community. So your work challenges us to see health as rooted in our relationships with land, food, ecology, and of course, one another. So what do you see as the greatest threats to brain health arising from the interaction of these systems? And of course, what is your vision of a brain healthy society?
Gurmagat is more in the north day of a ansho. Isas California me. Agus tam in Erin Lemo Fashti over Erson I wish Shinshire. Does that buy me 1 more minute? Just kidding. So in 3 minutes, so I study the health impacts of colonialism on our bodies, on our societies, and on the planet. And we might think, oh, colonialism, that was way long ago. We're all past that, right? No, but history and power sediment in our bodies, in our genetics. They're transmitted through stories. It's alive in the soil. And it's clearly there in the structures that persist. So although the British Empire might be gone from here now, the structures, the financial structures, the dynamics that extract from the soil, extract from the people, harm the land, the water, the air, are still there. And what's left is a lack of sovereignty, a lack of dignity, and a lack of ability to actually practice care in the way that we know how to and that we should be supporting. And so nowhere is this better seen than in Ireland, where the structures of the modern food system that are now damaging the insect population, the bird population, the pollinators, when they're not present, we don't get the micronutrients in our food. So a strawberry without the proper pollinators present doesn't have the amount of vitamin C. It's not the same medicine. It's not the same food. So how do we actually build and innovate exciting systems that will enable us to practice a level of care? And I'm excited, since those systems were innovated here in Ireland, to start reimagining them here in Ireland. This weekend, I met with 40 young farmers, agroecological farmers from Tallaght Bio, an agroecology group looking to innovate new local food solutions in Ireland that benefit people, planet, communities together that promote social cohesion, that allow us to see each other and the benefit of one another, and that can build back the soil health, the forest, the ecologies, the communities of Ireland, and the sovereignty of people to determine what's happening on the land, how the farmers are supported. So here at Trinity in the School of Medicine, I was invited to reimagine the food tray at St. James's Hospital. So I don't know how many people by show of hand love the food at St. James's Hospital right now. But okay, all right. I'll talk to you later. But there's a real opportunity right now because there's a new hospital kitchen that must be designed to start to take those procurement dollars from the HSC and get them, instead of going off the island to large multinational corporations that are creating damaging food systems, to Irish farmers who want nothing more than to honor the land, care for the earth, and care for the people. So if we can get that funding to develop and move Ireland to an agroecological system, I believe this island can be the future of the food system globally. So what we can build here can circulate around the world and show a lighthouse of this is how we build health from the soil up. This is how we address climate, brain health, human health, ecological health, and give young people a reason to go into farming and food systems. Because those young people I met with were so raring to go. They want to put Ireland on the map, but they don't have any of the structural support, and they keep hitting structural obstacles. So let's practice deep medicine together and build a future for the health from the ground up. Go with Melbet.
Rupa, thank you very much. So let's bring it down from the community to the individual level. Kim, over to you. Your thoughts about threats to human rights and what you see as the solution from your perspective as a human rights lawyer.
Yeah. So in my opinion, obviously there are many threats to brain health from a human rights perspective. However, I would suggest that the greatest one perhaps is the very unequal environments that individuals are living in. They're born in, they live in, they work in, they play in, they even die in these very unequal environments. And these environments vary. So we have environments with armed conflict, leading to forced migration. We have, as was mentioned earlier, the climate change crisis. We have low education, poverty, and just so many issues arising from inequalities within environments that individuals live in. And from the brain health perspective, a lot of focus is placed on, as we heard earlier, the individual risk factors and individual responsibility, and there is that, and that's extremely important. But from the human rights perspective, so too is this notion of duty and obligation, yes, of the community, but also of the state and of private actors. And so I think when we think about the threats to brain health at the individual level, it's kind of this piece that connects the entire human rights puzzle. So the identification of individuals as rights holders, but also the state as a duty bearer and private sector as having really tangible responsibilities in that space. And so in terms of the solution, it is kind of this reframing. So recognizing, yes, individual risk factors, but the systemic nature of the issue, which actually removes from the individual's brain health enhancing choices. So it really is about kind of changing that framing in people's minds from purely individualistic focus to recognizing the duties and obligations of others. And I would add to that point that it's also perhaps even going as far as recognizing brain health as a human right. Currently, that isn't the case. So it's kind of integrated within the right to health and mental and physical. But I think going as far as recognizing brain health as a standalone right would help, would be an important solution coming from this conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Amazing. So perhaps Ireland can be the first country to have brain health as a human right. Ian, over to you. From the neuroscience perspective, yes, you can set your clock. So how does the brain then embody these structural adversities that we've been thinking about?
So poverty eats away at mental capacities, which means that poverty and environmental stress creates a double whammy. You have the disadvantages of the lack of material, the worry, but then you have the reduced capacity to deal with it. Indian peasant farmers, their IQ is lower before an uncertain harvest, and then it rises after a good harvest. That's their IQ. Their mental capacity goes up. And you were talking about constants, you know, the uncertainty, the difficulty in predicting. That stress reduces people's ability to deal with it. Now, most of the people in this room were privileged to be in a very wealthy part of the world. Many of us are in the higher levels of socioeconomic status. And if you put us into a PET scanner, that is a positron emission tomography scanner, to measure the number of dopamine receptors in the reward network in the middle of the brain, the higher our perceived social status, the more receptors there are for dopamine. Now, what does that mean? That means your mood is higher, your motivation is greater, and your cognition is better. And there's been studies done in New York by Professor Martinez looking at people and getting them to rank themselves in a social status ladder and finding a linear relationship between their perceived social status and the availability of this incredible resource. So you might throw up your hands and say, isn't that terrible? Isn't that what people say about poverty? They just can't help themselves. However, there are two wonderful antidotes that disrupt this relationship completely. And the first of these, Mary, is meth. That relationship between perceived social status and number of dopamine receptors in the brain is hugely reduced in people with rich social networks. That's community. The second antidote is control. And wonderful research by researchers in Pittsburgh looking at all the disadvantages that come from lower perceived socioeconomic status. You live shorter lives. You get more sick. You're more depressed. You're less motivated. And these are horrible linear relationships, both between and within countries. Finish now. But in people who have a sense of control, and that can be small control, that can be community, that can be empowerment through the mehel, that relationship is abolished.
So thank you very much for those insights, everyone. And now I'm just going to ask you to close with one comment from all of you, or perhaps a sentence, reflecting first with yourself, Mrs. Robinson, on the following comment. So Chuck Feeney believed that investing in people could change the world. And as you reflect on the future of brain health, what one idea, value, or action would you hope that this audience can take away with them tonight?
Thank you for the question. I think it allows me to build on what Rupa was saying about food sovereignty. I'm really delighted you're still here, Taoiseach.
He's in the middle row.
Because we haven't met before, but I know of your work, and it's very relevant to what Project Dandelion thinks it can do in Ireland, which is to shine a bit of a light on those like Antalab Bio in the agroecology, but there are also horticulture. There's a link between them. There's a wonderful network of market gardens, north and south. In fact, they lobby quite a bit for more market gardens and community gardens. And this is all about local food production, local food sovereignty. And it's not it shouldn't become political, mustn't become political, but it should be more valued in the country, because it was a bit of it was a bit of a shock to me, to find that we import so much of what we consume, and you can see it in supermarkets. And children no longer have the wonder that I remember growing up with. June was my mother's birthday, and June meant strawberries. Our local grown strawberries, and it was an excitement. For those who are well enough off to be able to shop in supermarkets, etc. There is no season anymore in food. We have all this food imported. 83%, I think. 70% of our vegetables are imported. We're not even self-sufficient in potatoes, I understand. And then we have our wonderful beef and dairy, and we export 90% of it. And so it's a very strange kind of a world of long supply chains when we have a fragmentation going on. So I think, that would be my wish, and I've been too long, sorry, but I would love to see more food sovereignty here in Ireland.
And just to drive this home with you, Mary, because we're going to tag team here, it is, I think, the most important thing, because if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, and the financial and food flows in Ireland right now is the exact same as it was during Angkor Timur. 90% of the nutritional value of this land is leaving the island, and 85% of the food that's eaten here is coming from off the island. If that diesel price goes up, food prices go up, or the ships stop coming, we're all going to be eating beef stew for a really long time. And so it is time to innovate bold, transformative visions that actually innovate a care economy. I do not, as an artist and a writer and a physician, I know that we can do this. And there's a groundswell happening, and it's across the political spectrum. I've been meeting with farmers in men's sheds all across Ireland. And when you speak about the importance of the sovereignty of the land, the dignity of the farmers, the health of the soil, that is something we can all get behind, because then we're feeding our communities. That's how we build social cohesion. That's how we tackle the challenges facing us ahead.
So my one idea to leave with this audience is actually an idea that originated with Chuck Feeney, or Papa Chuck, as I learned from Juno. That's what the grandkids called him. And it was one that I saw on his very simple tombstone in Glasnevin Cemetery when a small group of fellows and Anne-Marie visited last year. And it says, and I'm paraphrasing, the one idea that I've always held in my entire life is that people should use their wealth to help others. So that's my one idea that I would like this audience to take away. I love that he used the word wealth, which has a broader meaning than just money. When I went back to the etymology of the word wealth, it from mid-13th century, it actually means wellness and happiness. And that's something that we can give to others, we can help others with, we can support others with. So that's my one idea, and it links nicely to the human rights framing, which is, as Chuck would say, it's all about people first. So take away from here today, let's use our wealth to help others. Thank you. And just one more piece onto that. We came here as Atlantic Fellows last year, and each Atlantic Fellow has done that, shared their wealth in whatever shape or form it's taken with others. So sometimes it was bringing the community into Trinity and hosting events. Sometimes it was going to the community. And we have brilliant examples from 2 Cents Collective and Grant Equity podcasts of fellows sharing their wealth, their definition of wealth with others. Thank you.
We have a problem of mental health, particularly in young people, and that's going to worsen brain health. There is an antidote to that, which is Chuck Feeney's way, which is altruism. Altruism is the greatest source of mood expansion and anxiety reduction. And if we can find a way of allowing populations to discover that looking after each other in the way you've just described, Kimberly, then that will be the incredible legacy of Chuck Feeney.
Pleasure. So thank you very much to everybody. I'll invite you to take a seat. So tonight we've heard about the threats and the challenge and how these are growing and interconnected. And we've also heard some amazing solutions, which have had lots of support here in the audience. But I think it's really important also to acknowledge the gap. And the gap is that we have significant fragmentation across disciplines. And very often we're caught in silos and we're not thinking and speaking in a transdisciplinary way. We have huge inequities in care. We have policy science disconnects. And very often we have lack of leadership capacity and connection. So then to implement these solutions, I offer that we need leaders who can connect across science and policy, connect across research and communities, across health, the arts, law, education, business, and the government. And in saying that, I show you the leaders. So the class of 2026, our 10th cohort. And just let me, in closing, call out what exactly GBHI is and what it is not. So GBHI is not a research institute, and yet we produce world-class research. We get published in Nature Neuroscience, Nature Medicine. We're not an arts and health organization, yet we produce initiatives that have movements, created movements across the world in 8 different countries. We're not a policy institute, but our fellows are shaping national conversations and influencing policy on brain health around the world. And also, we're not an advocacy organization, and yet initiatives like Walk the Talk, which have shown us what we can do with immersive, horizontal, radical collaborations to change the way we think and work. So what is GBHI? GBHI is a community of leaders, a catalyst for innovation and change, and it's where transdisciplinarity is exemplified. And I'll just call out this map because this reflects where our fellows are working and where they're from, but actually it's a policy map. So this is a lovely evocation of the outputs of GBHI over 10 years and the impact that they've had on significant policy documents around the world. And the bigger the bubble, the bigger the policy impact. So the movement is growing and the impact is only getting bigger. So tonight we've heard a common message that solutions are possible when we invest in leadership, equity, and collective action. And that's at the heart of what Chuck Feeney's extraordinary legacy is. And with that, I'd like to thank you for being part of this journey. And now, before we end, I'm going to just pass over to Professor Brian Lawler. You're on, Brian. Over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Ira, and it's a great honour to be here to give some closing remarks and reflections following this inaugural Chuck Feeney Lecture. First and foremost, I'd like to express our sincere thanks in particular tonight to An Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, our Provost, Linda Doyle, and to our speakers, Mary Robinson and Chris Exley, our wonderful chair and MC, Iracema Leroi, and each of our inspirational panellists, and I'll come to that in a moment. We've got Rupa, Ian and Kim. But a very special thanks and Céad Míle Fáilte to all of the Feeney family who have travelled to be with us today. It's wonderful to have so much of Chuck's family here with us. And it does feel GBHI is a family, and thank you for being with us. Let me share a few thoughts and reflections. I'm not going to keep you too long, but when it comes down to it, it's always people. And Chuck didn't use many words, but the words he used were very important. They were his words, and he lived by these words. Down through the years, we've heard and we've read many stories about Chuck, and I think we've heard some really impactful stories about Chuck and his legacy today. I guess Chuck had a special place in his heart, for Ireland, but also Ireland has a very special place in our heart for Chuck, and he is part of our modern history. But the stories for me that resonate the most are those that spoke to his values and what I would call his moral imagination, because he had moral imagination. His humanity, his grit, his humility. But particularly, and we heard about his deep interest in people, how he observed them, how he listened to them intentionally, and how he brought people together to develop new knowledge. But it was develop new knowledge to help others. And I'm given to understand that his methods in this regard sometimes were a little bit unconventional. To brainstorm on a topic, he might bring people together into a room and simply see what might happen, what might emerge from a conversation. And sometimes nothing happened. Everybody was disappointed. But on many occasions, when the right people came together in the room, there was a spark, a certain kind of magic that led to something big, an idea, something special, new knowledge that made a difference to people. And I think we're beginning to hear that tonight. In the panel discussion, there was a spark of knowledge. I think, did you feel it? Different, wasn't it? Different ideas, different people coming together to try and address a wicked problem, an issue. No one person can solve that. No one group can solve that. The silos have to be broken down. So when GBHI was thinking about how best to honour Chuck's legacy and celebrate 10 years of GBHI was very mindful of the kind of person he was. And we heard a little bit about Chuck's personality, his shyness, his humility. But what mattered most to him, and we heard this evening, was helping people and making a difference. And he has said himself, and I believe it's true because many people I've met have said this of him, he was at his happiest when he was helping others. So GBHI chose to do something a little bit different. This lecture series is part of keeping his legacy, his memory, and his story alive. And it's about bringing people together to imagine a better future, to develop new knowledge, to give something back right now, to give our wealth back now, giving while living, while we still can, and while it still matters. So in the years ahead, we expect the Chuck Feeney series to develop, to reflect GBHI's leadership in this space, inviting leading voices to Trinity to explore complex issues, to question assumptions, embrace uncertainty, and help shape how we think about the brain, how we think about the health of the brain. But again, what was touched on today, its potential to bring fairness to a world that so badly needs it right now. These are big ideas that can ignite our moral imagination and honor Chuck's legacy at the same time. So tonight, while we're celebrating 10 years of GBHI and Chuck's remarkable legacy, which we've heard about, we're also marking a new beginning with the launch of the Chuck Feeney Lecture Series. And to my mind, just listening to the discussion, I think we need to use this series to define the Feeney way of doing things. So I'd like to leave the last word to Chuck. And Mary Robinson took the words out of my mouth. She reminded us that in his life, that at the end of the day, it's always about the people. But he so wisely observed, and he was a wise observer, that you will never run out of people that you can help. So we must, if we're going to go this way and go the Feeney way, we have no excuses. We have to go and continue to help people. And so we must go on. So thank you everybody for being here. And I've been asked to announce that you're all invited to a post-event reception at the Regent House, and where you can continue the conversations that have started in this room. Thank you.